In 1980, there was a cornerback so feared, quarterbacks stopped throwing his way. Lester Hayes didn't just cover receivers, he erased them, playing defense on the edge of the rules, sometimes beyond them. And the league took notice. Hey, welcome to the Press Box Chronicles with Jeff Pearlman. Hey, welcome to the Press Box Chronicles with Jeff Pearlman, the show where a cranky middle-aged sports writer who has seen it all takes you behind the scenes and into the stories. I am your host, Jeff Pearlman. And if you look at my hands right now, I can't get the shit off of them. And the reason is because, I'm just going to be honest with you, I tape stuff to my hand. But I'm trying to offer the effect of what it was to be Lester Hayes back in the late 1970s and early 80s, when he was maybe the most dominant cornerback in the NFL, playing for the Oakland Los Angeles Raiders. And if you know anything about Lester Hayes, Lester the Molester, number 37, silver and black, you knew that he could cover any receiver, that he was a badass hitter, and most important, perhaps for his legacy, is that he coated his hands, his legs, his helmet with a notorious substance called Stickum. And today, we're going to dive into the legacy, life, and Stickum and hands of Lester Hayes. You know, one of the things I love about doing this show and this whole experience is an opportunity to dive into athletes who I felt like I knew a lot about, but it turns out I didn't. And in a lot of ways, Lester Hayes exemplifies this. When I was growing up, Lester Hayes was just, to borrow from Pulp Fiction, a badass motherfucker. He was a cornerback with the Raiders. Their uniforms were really cool. He had Stickum all over his hands. He would get down in this crouch and he just blanketed wide receivers. It could be Jerry Rice. It could be John Jefferson. It could be James Lofton. It could be Wesley Walker. It didn't matter. If Lester Hayes was on you, you were in trouble. And I remember being a kid in New York and seeing number 37 for the Raiders and just thinking, God, that guy is cool. God, that guy is cool. How come my Jets don't have anyone cool like Lester Hayes? And to tell the story of Lester Hayes well, I think there needs to be a little understanding of who he was. Lester Hayes is a kid out of Houston, Texas, specifically Wheatley High School. And when Lester Hayes was a young kid in middle school, he had a friend who stuttered. And according to Lester Hayes later on, and this is going to sound weird, and maybe it doesn't even make sense, Lester Hayes started copying his friend's stutter until the point that he started stuttering too. And throughout high school and college, Lester Hayes had this really, really pronounced stutter that kind of became one of his calling cards. In fact, media kind of avoided him. A lot of people kind of avoided conversation with him because of the thick stutter. And if you were ignoring Lester Hayes when he was at Wheatley High School in Houston, you were ignoring an athletic phenomenon, the likes of which we rarely see. Lester Hayes was a Texas state champion, Class 4A, in the 220 dash. He ran the 100 in a 9.5. He ran the 40 in a 4.55. He was a six-man on Wheatley's basketball team, was a 6-foot center. He was a phenomenal football player who was a defensive lineman and a linebacker and sometimes a wide receiver at high school. And he actually wound up coming out of high school and only receiving 6 or 7 football scholarship offers, but about 100 track and field offers. But Lester Hayes desperately wanted to play football. So he goes to Texas A&M, one of the 6 or 7 schools that offers him a scholarship. And while at Texas A&M, he's a linebacker. And his nickname is the Judge. And that nickname came from a statement he made before Texas A&M was playing Texas at the time. They had Earl Campbell, their transcendent running back. And the quote he said was, "Our defense is going to hold court on Earl Campbell. I'm sentencing him to 2 yards on 20 carries." And in that game, Earl Campbell winds up actually running for 20 yards on 18 carries. So it's kind of funny. Lester Hayes is a fantastic player at Texas A&M, and he ultimately switches to safety. And as a senior, he picks off 8 passes. He's one of the best defensive backs in the country. He's blistering speed. He's a hard hitter in the sort of tradition of Jack Tatum, those types of guys. And he's convinced heading into the 1977 NFL draft, he's going to be picked in the first 2 rounds. He goes to the Hula Bowl. He plays awesome. He goes to the Japan Bowl. He plays awesome. Cal coach Mike White, who's a coach in those games, gives him the nickname Unreal because he says this guy is just unreal. And he knows he's going to be picked really high. Well, the 77 draft comes, and Lester Hayes is selected in the 5th round, 126 overall. 14 defensive backs are picked ahead of him. When he's sitting there paying attention to the draft, he's just devastated. And he's having all this self-doubt. Why wasn't I picked? Why wasn't I picked? What did I do wrong? And at first he thinks it's because he hit inappropriately, aka he hit after the whistle, he went to the head, and he thought maybe NFL teams were turned off by that. Then he thought maybe it's because of my stutter. And he actually said to Frank Cooley of the San Francisco Examiner, I stutter. I've stuttered since 3rd grade. Maybe the scouts thought my problem with speaking reflected some lack of intelligence. I don't know, but I do know it has nothing to do with how I play football. In 1977, Lester Hayes only starts 2 of 14 regular season games, but he's kind of a revelation. He's super fast off the ball. He can cover anyone. He makes up space. He's wicked fast. And he winds up starting the 2 playoff games that the Raiders play in that year. In fact, he gives up the winning touchdown in the AFC title game to Denver Bronco wide receiver Haven Moses. But John Madden, the coach of the Raiders teammates are just blown away. This guy is a legit talent. Not only that, he's now playing cornerback. He was a safety in college. They moved him to cornerback. He's a lockdown guy. You can leave him alone. He can go one-on-one against the best wide receivers in the AFC, and it's not a problem. 1979, he starts 16 games. He has 7 interceptions. He returns 2 for touchdowns. And people are like, Jesus Christ, this guy's really fucking good. What is it about Lester Hayes? What is it about Lester Hayes? And what it is about Lester Hayes, along with speed, along with talent, is this stuff he's putting on his hands called Stickum. So there are a bunch of rumors, stories, concepts, whatever you want to call it, about how Lester Hayes became not just Lester Hayes, but Lester Hayes, the Stickum guy. And when Hayes got to the Raiders in 1977, their star wide receiver and a future Hall of Famer was named Fred Biletnikoff. And if you look back at old pictures of Fred Biletnikoff, old number 25 on the Raiders, he would always have this brown substance kind of slathered on him. Not ridiculously so, not like Lester Hayes later did, but he would have it on him. And there was this stuff called Stickum. And Stickum is basically an adhesive that players would kind of rub out on their hands. And it was brown and it was goopy, and you would put it on and it would just stick. Like if you would take your hands after you applied Stickum on both of them, put it like this, you would really struggle to get your hands apart, and you finally would. And Fred Biletnikoff, great Raider wide receiver, used Stickum all the time. And according to lore and one of the stories Lester Hayes has told, and he's told a lot of different stories about this, one day Fred Biletnikoff goes up to Lester Hayes and says, basically takes some of his Stickum off of him and gives it to Lester Hayes and says, you should try this. And Lester Hayes tries it, likes it, tries more of it, likes it, tries more of it, likes it. And before long is just putting Stickum all over him. Another thing that Lester Hayes has talked about that I actually kind of like as a story is Lester Hayes played college football at Texas A&M with a defensive back named Pat Thomas. And there was a game on December 4th, 1977, when Pat Thomas was playing for the Rams. Lester Hayes was on the Raiders. Fred Biletnikoff is on the Raiders. And Pat Thomas is covering Fred Biletnikoff, and he holds him to 4 catches for 47 yards. And Pat Thomas had, like Fred Biletnikoff, put Stickum all over himself, and Fred Biletnikoff could not separate himself from him. Like, they would touch, Pat Thomas would make contact with Biletnikoff, and Biletnikoff couldn't move because he was basically stuck to Pat Thomas. Lester Hayes later said, I kept adding more and more of it to my body, and I just realized more than anything, more than catching the ball, it helped me with the bump and run because wide receivers couldn't get away from me. So if Miami's Nab Moore is playing against Lester Hayes and they collide, there's a moment where Nab Moore can't get away. And that actually goes underspoken in this sort of Stickum universe where we talk about how you're able to catch the ball is people can't get away from you. So Lester Hayes is a rookie, 1977, watching the Rams' Pat Thomas keep Fred Biletnikoff in check because he can't get away from him. So stage by stage by stage, almost game by game by game, Lester Hayes is like, oh, stick him. And then he's like, stick him. And then he's like, stick him. And then he literally stick him. If you look at his helmet, you'll see stick him on his helmet. Stick him right here. I'm not wearing shoes, but stick him here. Stick him here. And he was just putting stick him all over himself. And it's kind of fantastic. Some of the images that I'm sure we'll show here of Lester Hayes, black or silver uniform, covered in what looks like basically like shit. It looks like he took dog shit and put it all over himself, but it was Stickum. And 1979, he has 7 interceptions. He returns 2 for touchdowns. It's his breakout year where people are like, holy shit, this guy, Lester Hayes, he's legit. And there's coaches, old school guys, Tom Landry with the Cowboys, Don Shula with the Dolphins, who are starting to complain about this to the league office. Like, number one, they don't like how it looks. Number 2, it seems unfair. Number 3, their players aren't really willing to do it. Like, to put on Stickum, to make the full dive into Stickum, it's not like overly fun. Like, you do have to put the shit all over you, and it does make it hard in other areas. So it's not that popular, but it's also unfair. And Lester Hayes starts making these interceptions that are utterly, utterly ridiculous. Like, take this mask my son made when he was in kindergarten. Like, the ball would be coming and it would like touch his fingers and you can watch and it would just go into his hand. Or like it would come like this one-handed interception. Lester Hayes would grab it and the ball would stay where other guys are dropping it. And Stickum becomes a part of his game. And it gives him confidence and more confidence and more confidence. And he said at one point, if I'm being honest, I couldn't catch a cold without Stickum. I needed Stickum. And entering the 1980 season, Lester Hayes is full Stickum. Like 1980 is a year where Lester Hayes wears more Stickum than he's wearing clothing. He has it everywhere. And what he does, not coincidentally, is put together the greatest single season I think a defensive back has ever had. In 1980, Lester Hayes has 13 interceptions for 273 yards. He had 4 other interceptions that were called back. And I'm going to go game by game a little bit so you can appreciate in full the year that Lester Hayes had in 1980. Week 1, they beat the Chiefs 27-14. Lester Hayes intercepts a pass from Steve Fuller. Week 2, they lose to the Chargers in overtime. He has one of the Raiders' 5 interceptions against Dan Fouts. Week 3, Joe Theismann, quarterback, picks off a Joe Theismann pass. Week 4, Joe Ferguson with the Buffalo Bills returns an interception, 48 yards for a touchdown. Week 8, he has 2 interceptions against Jim Zorn. The first leads to a touchdown, the second to a field goal. Week 9, this is an Associated Press story. Lester Hayes had 1 interception and would have had another, on which he rambled 95 yards for an apparent touchdown, had the play not been called back by an Oakland offside penalty. Week 10, they beat the Bengals. He has 1 interception, but he could have had 3 if 2 hadn't been nullified by offside penalties. Week 11, they beat the Seahawks again with 4:20 left in the game. He intercepts a Jim Zorn pass, returns it 19 yards to the Oakland 38. Raiders win. Week 12, they lose to the Eagles in what will be a Super Bowl preview. He picks off a Ron Jaworski pass. Big pick in the game, but they lose. Week 13, the Broncos picks off another pass from Craig Morton. Week 15 against the Broncos has a second quarter interception. Week 16 against the Giants, says the New York Times, late in the second quarter with the Giants trailing by 2 touchdowns, quarterback Scott Bruner overthrew a pass to Billy Taylor. It was intercepted by Lester Hayes, his 13th steal of the season, and returned it 50 yards. They play in the playoffs, the Houston Oilers in the first round. Lester Hayes picks off an interception in the end zone in the third quarter. Then he has a second interception later on in the game. And it's a 2 interception, 2 sack game for Lester Hayes. And there's a moment in that game against the Oilers that Matt Millen of the Raiders later talked about. And this is how football lore works. The Raiders had a center named Carl Mock. And supposedly right before a field goal attempt, Lester Hayes walked by the football, touched it with his hand when no one was looking to put Stickum all over the ball. And the way Matt Millen of the Raiders tells it, the center for the Oilers, Carl Mock, oversnapped the ball because of the Stickum on the ball, and the field goal was missed. I went back and looked at the tape. That actually never happened, but the story is so good I'm including it here, but it actually never happened. Sorry, Matt Millen. Another playoff game against the Browns. He picks off Brian Sipe, the Browns quarterback, 2 times. The Raiders advance. And playoff game 3 against the Chargers, you have John Jefferson, our favorite guy here at Press Box Chronicles, going up against Lester Hayes. Lester Hayes picks off his 18th pass of the season. It's in the playoffs. And the Raiders go on to beat the Eagles in the Super Bowl. Lester Hayes does not have an interception in the Super Bowl, but they win the Super Bowl. I say this sincerely. There's never been a better season for a defensive back. He had 18 picks total, including the playoffs. He was a lockdown, shutdown, do not fuck with this guy cornerback. He was the best anyone has ever seen. And I feel like people forget this. Number 1, because he's now in the Hall of Fame. Number 2, because time goes by. Number 3, because Al Davis, the Raiders owner, just digested all the oxygen in the room. But Lester Hayes in 1980 was as good as Lawrence Taylor in his best year, Eric Dickerson in his best year, Barry Sanders in his best year, Tom Brady in his best year. And then the following season, the NFL decided, fuck that, we need to do something about this. So it's March 18th, 1981. You have the NFL league meetings in Florida. And basically, especially at the time, it's a bunch of stodgy old white guys who don't like anything but the corporatization of football. And they want everything to be traditional. And we need to have respect for the game. And when men were men, it's that whole bullshit, that garbage. Don Shula, Chuck Noll, George Halas, George Allen, like old stodgy football. Your uniforms have to be just right. Blah, 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 blah. We don't need any fun. It's football. Football is fun. Fuck the fun. And they passed 10 new rules at this meeting, including one that becomes known immediately as the Lester Hayes rule, which is no more Stickum. Stickum is outlawed. And when Lester Hayes finds out that Stickum is outlawed, you would think he would have been like, oh, fucking A, blah, 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 my career. He actually wasn't. Lester Hayes basically says, I wouldn't expect anything less from these douchebags. These guys don't get it. They don't like style. They don't like pizzazz. They just want the game to be stodgy. I don't care. I'm still a great defensive back. I'm still going to be great. That's okay. And actually what's interesting is the reason Lester Hayes is able to so eloquently express himself is at the same time the NFL is ruling that Stickum can't exist, he is going through intensive speech therapy and actually overcomes his stutter. And this guy, throughout the early part of his career, who was a really bad and halting and difficult interview, learns to slow down, learns to measure his words, and he becomes a great interview and a great spokesperson in the NFL. And 1981, so 1980 has his dream season. 1981, he has 3 interceptions. He's not using Stickum anymore. He's still great. They're just not throwing there that much. 1982, he has 2 more interceptions. And 1983 winds up being kind of a dream season for Lester Hayes. And you may think, why a dream season? He only had 2 interceptions. Multiple reasons. Number 1, the Raiders reach the Super Bowl again. But number 2, the Raiders pull off this insanely great deal where they acquire, if Lester Hayes isn't the greatest defensive back in football, the greatest defensive back in football is New England's Mike Haynes. But Mike Haynes has a contract dispute with the Patriots, and he winds up being dealt to the Raiders. So all of a sudden, in 1983, you have Lester Hayes at one corner, Mike Haynes at the other corner, and you cannot throw against the Raiders. It is impossible. And if you watch that Super Bowl where they beat the Washington Redskins, annihilated the Washington Redskins, the Redskins had these wide receivers who were really good. They had Charlie Brown on one side, they had Art Monk on the other side, could not get open. And what the Raiders did is they just went single coverage. They had Hayes on one, Haynes on the other, shutdown, lockdown, nothing. And when the Raiders win that Super Bowl and they beat the Redskins, Lester Hayes feels like his career is complete and fulfilled. He's won 2 Super Bowls. He's going to be known as one of the great defensive backs of his generation, of all time, actually. He forms his kinship with Mike Haynes, and it's great. The next year, he only has 1 interception. 85, he has 4 interceptions. 86, he has 2 interceptions. And 1987, you have the NFL players strike, where there are no games, and some players are crossing the picket line, and some players are not. And at this point, Lester Hayes is 32 years old. He's had 10 NFL seasons under his belt. And on October 8th, 1987, he actually crosses the picket line just to get treatment on his foot. because he says, my foot has been chewed up by AstroTurf, and my foot is grotesque. My left foot is half troglodyte and half human. That's his quote. It's a great quote. And he crosses the line, and there's some people who are pissed off, and ultimately he never plays for the Raiders again. He retires. And nowadays, Lester Hayes lives in Northern California, and he does some coaching, and he does a lot of mentoring, and he's just this really lovely, lovely human being. And there's something when I was researching this, I have to say that really pissed me off. Lester Hayes had 39 career interceptions for 572 yards, returned 4 for touchdowns. He won 2 Super Bowl championships. He is one of the 10 greatest defensive backs, certainly cornerbacks, in the history of the NFL. And for some reason, that is just a combination of stupid and insulting. Lester Hayes is not in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And I want to note, and I think this is really important, within the last, 5 years, 2 Raiders, Kenny Stabler and Cliff Branch, have both been inducted into Hall of Fame after they died. And there's nothing more bullshit to me than inducting athletes who've been eligible for a long time after they die and they're not around to enjoy it. And we could play the music and say, oh, this is so great. But if they're not here to enjoy it, what freaking difference does it make? And it is far past time for Lester Hayes to be inducted into the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And if this show does anything, this YouTube series that we just started on a lark, if it can bring attention to the plight and worthiness of Lester Hayes, Lester the Molester, the guy out of Houston, the speedster who only had 6 football scholarships, who went on to Texas A&M as a linebacker, then a safety, becomes a cornerback, slathers his hands and feet and head with all this stuff. Later on, it's outlawed, but he still continues to perform at a high level, wins 2 Super Bowls. If we're able to do anything, and that one thing is get Lester Hayes serious consideration for the Pro Football Hall of Fame, then I consider the show well worthwhile. That's a wrap for this episode of Press Box Chronicles with Jeff Pearlman. Do me a favor, leave a comment below on what stories you'd like to hear more about, or if there's a sports figure who interests you. Please make sure you like and subscribe. Follow me on TikTok at Jeff Pearlman Author and on Bluesky at Jeff Pearlman. My latest book, Only God Can Judge Me, The Many Lives of Tupac Shakur, is out now. Thank you for diving behind the scenes and digging into the story. We'll see you next time on Press Box Chronicles.